What up, y'all? It's D and Z. Ziggy is officially back. I know y'all are excited, but try to contain your hype for a second so I can get through the intro. God, we're just two dudes from Mtg. We like it at Magic. We got a chill little couch top 10 for you today because you know what? Standard nowadays, just like your mom, is wide open. What is that? Oh, it's OSHA. Okay, I shouldn't have gotten too startled there. It's just the 10,000th your mom joke that we've done since we started the channel. Should probably retire those, to be honest. Move on to the much funnier and much classier your dad joke. Anyway, Standard. It's a format of Magic the Gathering that we play. Until recently, it kind of wasn't. Standard had been kind of a bad place for a while now, and people have been leaving the format in droves, which sucks, because it's my favorite format. I've always been a Standard guy. I've been playing Magic for a quarter of a century now, and I've actually loved Type 2, that's what the boomers used to call it, pretty much this entire time that I've been a Magic player. I like the fresh, rotating nature of the format. I've been through this a million times. I've been on YouTube 7 years. At this point, you know why I like Standard, so I was a little bummed out, to say the least, that Standard was the sucky format for like 2 years, but now we're back in a Standard where a lot more seems possible than it did just a couple of months ago. Thing is, though, there are a lot of cards in Standard, and you haven't played Standard in like 2 years, so how are you to know what these cards do? That's a little bit of hyperbole, but like, not much in some cases, so there are a ton of cards that people haven't even looked at in like a whole 12 months at this point that might actually have a chance in the current format. So let's do it. Let's not waste too much more time on the pre-list shenanigans here. Let's talk about the top 10 forgotten cards. Might be worth taking a look at in Kamigawa Standard. Let's go.
I'm sorting through some heinous haters like a pooper scooper. I'm just trying to take my life like a Koopa Trooper. I'm Double Mario. That means I'm super. And I'm freaking dangerous like a Chupa Cabre.
You guys remember when I had hair like on the top of my head and not just like the back of my head? That was a time to be alive. I wonder how much a wig costs. Should look into that. But anyway, list. You guys tend to really like lists. That's why I made this content, and that's why you clicked on the video. So there's a social contract that we have together. I got to get into this list. Let's talk about it. I almost made this like a top 25. We were really close. Had to cut a bunch of cards. But that was easy once I made Doe Rules. Cue Fairy Godparents JPEG here. Is it there? Okay, cool. All right, so a few rules here. First of all, I had to come to terms with the fact that no matter how much I wanted to be, Standard is not Commander. So we're not going to have cards like In Search of Greatness on here. We're not going to have like Instrument of the Bards on this list. Weird, both of those cards are green. There are a few other green cards I could have put on here, honestly, but I didn't. But they're all just in the not Commander category. There's like 15 cards that could have been on this list. Aside from that, I don't want to talk about a bunch of stuff I've already talked about. So like Nighthawk Scavenger was originally on the list, along with like Westgate Regent. I've talked about these cards in similar lists before, so just go watch those videos. They hold up. And then finally, there are cards that I realized weren't actually forgotten that were on my list. I wanted to point out that like, oh, Vorinclex is a pretty good card in this format. Everyone remembers Vorinclex. I play against Vorinclex on an almost daily basis on Arena. Same with like Waking the Trolls. You know, I was like, oh, Waking the Trolls is a good one to point out right now. Again, I play against Waking the Trolls like twice a day, so I don't think that card's really forgotten, so it's not really worth putting on this list. I'm looking for really niche stuff for the most part. Honorable mentions first, as usual, and even though I cut a lot of cards from this list, I couldn't help myself. I still have 3 honorable mentions, and I'm going to blaze through like super fast. First of all, hear me out. Thieving Skydiver. I can't be the only one that's noticed that there's a bunch more artifacts seeing play nowadays. I mean, obviously, Asika's Chariot is a card we've been playing for a long time. Like, since the first day it was available to play in Standard, we've been playing Chariot, but it's even more popular than ever now. So, if all you ever do is, like, jump down and snatch your opponent's Chariot for 6 mana, that's not the worst play in the world. But I would say, again, so many artifacts are seeing play right now that this has more targets than it's had since it was released. So, maybe not more often than not, but a lot more often than you could, you'll find a target to snatch with a Skydiver. Try the card out, but if you're the one playing all the artifacts, maybe give the Blackstaff of Waterdeep a shot. There are a ton of mono blue and blue white and Esper artifacts decks that people are toying around with now. We got Tezzeret, it's an awesome artifact, or awesome planeswalker for these artifact decks rather. And it turns out that the Blackstaff is a really sweet card right now. You can either use this to turn inanimate stuff into 4/4s, or your Tezzeret itself can turn this into a 4/4. It only costs you 1 mana originally. So there's a lot of cool things about Blackstaff right now, and I've been having a lot of fun trying it out. Just go out there and swing it around for a while and see if you like it. But the last honorable mention is a card that I've brought up a couple of times, especially if you're a fan of the streams. Haven't mentioned it too much on the channel, but I gotta talk about Haunting Voyage. Is it finally time for this card? Probably not, as usual, but I do think we're in the kind of standard where, again, even though it's not Commander, you're probably more able to get to and resolve this card than you have been since it's been printed into Standard. And I think we're at a point right now where there is a possible Haunting Voyage endgame. There's a ton of tricks with it and stuff, but it's the beginning and middle game that are a little harder to suss out when it comes to building your Haunting Voyage deck, and I think that one day, one of us will figure this card out, and it'll actually be pretty decent. But now let's get to some, actual cards. The honorable mentions are mostly meant for memes, and number 10 is often a meme that's just barely not enough of a meme from the honorable mentions, and I think this time around, we got a pretty good candidate for that spot. Blex Vexing Pest is going to start the list off. I'll talk about your forgotten cards. When this thing first came out, I was super excited. I couldn't wait to flex with Blex, but it didn't take us long to go completely soft on this, just like your dad. What did I tell you? Always funnier. But in context of present day, both halves of Blex actually look pretty good now, right? The first half is a 3-mana 3/2 that gains you 4 life when it dies. It's really not bad, but the cool thing about it is the Anthem effect, especially when you consider the cards that are seeing play right now. I twitch. That's a bat. Did you know that? It's a bat. It gets +1/+1 because of this guy. The pest that you go get from your pest summoning when you hit your learn board, now you're paying 3 mana for 4 power and stats on 2 bodies. That's actually pretty good. And, of course, Lolth makes spiders. You're going to get 3/2 spiders instead of 2/1 spiders if you have a Blex out. And that's actually kind of a huge deal some of the time. There's just so many things about Blex that still look good to me to this day. And even though Blex hasn't been great so far in Standard, I think now we're in the kind of Standard where this might be a strong card. Needless to say, I'm perplexed by the lack of Blex. I mean, at the very least, you could make, Blex Luger jokes. Very deep cut, but I promise you, 4 people in the audience are laughing very hard at that. But anyway, let's move on to number 9, which is apparently, I've written this down, Curse of Hospitality. Let's justify this. I actually think there are plenty of ways you could justify this card right now. I just said that Mono Red is a deck, and it plays tons of 1-drops, and they're all pretty conducive to this card. Let's say you eventually get swept, which is what's going to happen. There's a ton of sweepers in the environment right now, so let's say you get hit by the dreaded sweeper, a Meathook Massacre or something like that. Well, a lot of the cards in your Mono Red deck are 1-drops with haste, right? Rabbit Battery, probably playing 3 or 4 copies of that. Reinforced Ronin, maybe you're playing a few copies of that. You've got a lot, and there's more than that, but you've got a lot of red hasty 1-drops. So even if you get swept, maybe you draw a Rabbit Battery. You play your 1 mana, you throw that down, you get in for your combat damage, and you take a free card from that. That just in and of itself is pretty good, but before the sweeper, obviously Hospitality is great too. It's like a Toski for Mono Red decks. It's actually even harder to kill than a Toski. And to be honest, Toski's not as good as it once was because everyone's playing the Meathook Massacre, right? Meathook Massacre for just 3 mana kills the 4 mana Toski, so you don't see that much nowadays. So this might be an interesting replacement for a card like Toski if you're looking for one. Ziggy's back. Number 9 is probably the least forgotten card on the list, mostly because it's doing some work in Alchemy, but according to the comments on my channel, none of you play Alchemy, so you might have forgotten about Teleportation Circle. I know none of you want to have forgotten about Teleportation Circle. A lot of people have been fascinated with this card since it was first released, and I'm one of you. So I will say there are probably fewer of us, though, than there have been since the card was released, which is a shame because I think now is the time to reinvest in it. Now, as far as engines go, I do worry that this Standard is a world of monstrous 440 big blocks with ridiculous top speed, B16Bs that hit VTech extremely early in their cycle, and very clean burning, lightweight, and efficient SR20 DETs, and Teleportation Circle is a 25 cubic centimeter lawnmower engine in comparison to those decks. But, that said, I do think there are a whole world of creatures and artifacts, keep that in mind, that Teleportation Circle might be very, very good with right now. And again, we're in a standard environment where games tend to go a little bit longer. You can set things up a little bit more liberally. And in that world, Teleportation Circle might be really good, especially if you have the tools to protect it. Even the white-based life gain deck that like blinks its creatures and gets triggers for Voice of the Blessed and stuff, like even that deck looks kind of good with a Teleportation Circle. And you get to call that deck the Circle of Life, which is very clever and fun. So there's all kinds of cool stuff you can do with Circle right now. Try the card out. But let's move on to number 7. We're only on number 7? That's crazy. Number 7 is Yorn, God of Winter. Now, to be honest, I'm really not too concerned with this half of Yorn. The front half of it. It's just a 3-mana 3/3. Look, if you can untap all your stuff when it swings, if you can pull that off, probably good. Probably not bad in most games of Magic. That has always been true. But what I'm a little bit more interested in is the other half of the card. The Caldring, what is the name of the staff? I forgot. But anyway, this thing looks really interesting right now. I was just talking about sort of grindy engines that mid-range decks need to set up to be successful nowadays. And this looks like a pretty good little thing to get you tons of value every single turn. Not only that, but it's Vanishing Verse Proof, which is incredibly important in the current environment. So, card's got a few things going for it. And even though you can only get back snow stuff, plenty of snow stuff, I'd be willing to get back with it. Really staff-centric list this time around. A lot of staffs on this list. But let's move on to number 6, which is Wish. Now, I wish there were more examples of how to use this card in the current standard, but there are a few that I want to point out. Now, like I've been kind of saying, we're in a format where games tend to go longer some of the time. Right, it used to be that we're in a sort of win by turn X, usually 5 to 7, or the actual good mid-range engine in the format is going to crush you, or your opponent's going to play Hullbreaker Horror, which there's actually surprisingly less of right now. I don't think it's going to last forever. Or your opponent's just going to run you over with their mono white deck, which there is surprisingly less of right now. I don't expect that to hold either, but for the time being, there's a little less Hullbreaker and a little less mono white, so we're in a format that's really dependent on people getting their mid-range engine up and running, and whoever has the coolest mid-range engine at the end of it all sometimes wins the game. And I think Wish is really good in a format like that, where you can make sure that a lot of your deck slots are devoted to either controlling the game out until you need to go get your win condition with Wish, or a lot of your deck slots are devoted to maybe the construction of a combo, which we do see a little bit of nowadays in the constructing, again, of various engines. So Wish allows you to play, instead of 4 of each of your combo pieces, you play 3 of each of your combo pieces, and maybe 2 to 4 wishes. This effectively gives you more pieces of each of those combo pieces in your main deck, because you might get one of them out, can't draw the other one, just play Wish. You have more of a chance in this hypothetical scenario to draw the second piece of your combo or the first piece of your combo, because you have Wish helping you put it together. So in a kind of control combo hybrid that has a lot of turns to build resources and mana, control the board state, and just go get its win condition or its combo pieces at its leisure, Wish is very, very good in that kind of scenario. And we're looking at a standard right now where that kind of deck is possible. So I wish you'd give it a shot. But let's move on to the bottom half of the list, which is where the really, really good stuff is. Now, I'm not saying that the previous 5 cards are all just like memes or whatever, but, you know, bottom half of the list tends to be better than the top half of the list. In this case, I think that's even more true. A lot of separation between these 5 cards we're about to talk about and the 5 cards we've already talked about. So let's go ahead and talk about number 5, Dragon's Guard Elite. Now, I really think this card is better now than it has been since it was printed. And you could probably say that about a lot of Strixhaven cards. A lot of them Strixhaven cards looking good nowadays. But in any case, this one, I think, is looking uniquely good. It's weird to say that in a format where Vanishing Verse is the most popular removal spell, right? But I think that in decks you're going to play this in, decks like, you know, Green-White Lumamancer, for instance, or Green-Blue Tempo, a Simic Tempo deck, you have plenty of ways to protect a card like this. And we're in an environment where you might actually end up using that activated ability on it, something that I've never done, but I could see actually doing. You know, again, games tend to go a little bit longer nowadays, and if you end up with the 6 mana needed to activate this ability, you can do it just win the game if your opponent doesn't have the proper removal on them at the time. So I actually really like Elite right now. I'm really enjoying the sort of Simic tempo style in the current meta. I think that it plays through a lot of what's going on right now, and it's sort of a sleeper deck, and this is one of the pivotal, critical cards for that deck. So if you haven't tried out an Elite in a while, take it for a spin. It's a good card. Now for number 4, we're going to talk about what is, I think, perhaps the most underrated refill for a mid-range deck in the whole format. Let's bring up Reconstruct History briefly here. This is a great card. It draws you a bunch of cards all at one time, and it's really not hard for it to do that in the current environment. I don't think you have to play 4 of this card, but like a 2 of Reconstruct History will sometimes put you in a situation where your opponent has 0 or 1 cards in their hand, and you end up having 5. And that wins you the game. A lot of people will scoop in the right situation to a Reconstruct History because you get your best Planeswalker back and a bunch of other stuff. It's kind of surprising this card isn't in my top 3 because it's one that I have like some of the most personal faith in of any card on the list. I have experienced firsthand on both sides of the card, both playing it and playing against it, how good this card is at exactly this precise moment in Standard. I'm telling you, brew around this card. You might be impressed. Now, kicking off the top 3 here, I don't want to say this card is completely forgotten because my Twitch chat certainly hasn't forgotten about this card. Anytime I make a black deck, people ask me, how come no Toxrill? But I think in the outside world, most people have moved beyond Toxrill. Now, this almost didn't make the list because, again, Standard is not Commander, but I think there are plenty of ways in just like mono black to ramp this out right now with all the various treasure production. But you can do that in red black. You can certainly do it in green black where there's tons of ramp to get this thing out. And of course, you know, just do it the old fashioned way and reanimate the card. There's lots of ways to do that. But I think Toxrill is really, really sweet right now. It's not quite the Meat Hook Massacre or anything, but at the same time, there's a lot of tokens decks. There are so many decks that play lots and lots of tokens, whether it's Wedding Announcement, and yeah, you got to either kill the Wedding Announcement or you have to hit your Toxrill before they flip over Wedding Announcement into the Anthem effect. But still, a lot of people are playing Lolth right now. People playing Kaito Shizuki. That makes 1/1s. People are, again, experimenting with Scoot Swarm nowadays. That makes 1/1s. A lot of people playing these little aggro decks that play 1 toughness creatures. Spikefield Hazard's still a pretty good card, so I imagine that Toxrill, when you get it out, is pretty good against a lot of decks too. And if you do kill stuff, it fills your side of the table with things that eventually draw cards. Again, great in a long game. I just think that even despite the 7 mana price tag on this card, there's tons of ways to cheat it into play. And in this environment right now, even against like control decks, it's not bad because even the control decks make tokens. Number 2 is a card that I've actually seen pop up in the other deck lists tab on MTG Melee a couple times this season, but I'm pretty sure it's still obscure enough to be on this list. It turns out, though, I think there's a lot of decks should be trying to play this card right now. Let's talk for a second about Guardian of Faith. Now, or is it Guardian of the Faith? I always forget if there's an article adjective in this card's name or not. But anyway, this is actually really sweet right now. One of the most important cards in the whole format is a card I've brought up multiple times in this video. It's the Meat Hook Massacre. But there's tons of other important sweepers. Obviously, Doomscar. Farewell is seeing 2 and 3 and even 4 of play in various decks right now. So it's incredibly important to be protected from sweepers right now because even mid-range decks with lots of creatures play sweepers, you know, like the Orzhov Tokens decks that play lots of creatures. They play tokens. They play sweepers. You know, so even decks with creatures pack sweepers nowadays. And I think Guardian of the Faith is a great way of making sure that you just close a game. Like, just close it. Stop all this nonsense. You know, there's so many games in Standard right now. One of the reasons that they last 30 minutes is because you and your opponent both build your resources, you build up your forces, and then around turn like 6, a sweeper gets hit. It's a farewell to Meat Hook Massacre, something like that. We reset the board state. And now, and only now, does the actual game of Magic begin. You see, the real, true game of Magic begins after the first sweeper is hit. With Guardian of Faith, you can just skip all that. You can just skip the true game of Magic. And for 3 mana, just win the next turn, usually is how that works. I think that right now we're in a situation where there's going to be sometimes where the timeline would split when your opponent plays that Meat Hook Massacre. Either you're playing Magic for another 25 minutes of your life and you miss your favorite show, or maybe you have a significant other that wants you to pay attention to them and they gradually get more and more upset that you aren't doing that, you're playing this game of Magic, or maybe you have a dog that you need to feed and your dog gets very sad that you're not feeding. There's like a lot of things that could happen in the 25 minutes that you've decided to devote your life to this game of Magic. Or instead of splitting off into that timeline, you play Guardian of Faith and end the game immediately. Feed your dog, spend time with your loved ones. Sound like a better deal to me, but let's move on to number one. The number one card in the whole entire video, which actually, there are a few candidates for this slot. I wanted the number one card to be a relatively aggressively costed, multicolored creature. I feel like gold creatures that are aggressively costed are in a uniquely good position in the current environment. For one, a gold creature can't be killed by a Vanishing Verse, which is just about the best and most played piece of removal currently in Standard. It's played by both Orzhov and Esper, two of the most played decks. So you got to get around those Vanishing Verses, and I think, again, gold creatures are good at doing that. But a lot of players also tend to ramp into, like, Meathook Massacres and stuff, so if your creature is aggressively costed, yet has decent stats, it is not necessarily harder for your opponent to kill them with a Meathook Massacre, but you are more likely to get value off of them before your opponent can hit a Meathook Massacre. So, again, there are a few decent candidates for this. I looked at Blade Historian, a card I don't think enough people are playing right now. It has a lot of value the turn it hits the table, to say the least, but I felt like the card wasn't aggressively costed enough. I also looked at Florian, which I do think is aggressively costed enough and can get you some value the turn it hits the table, but I don't think that it's incredibly good in this particular environment right now. But a card that I do think lines up really well with what people are doing in the current Standard is Vanishing Verse proof and is aggressively costed and statted enough to kind of meet all the criteria that I was looking for, is Sarulf Realm Eater. This thing has actually been really slick for me lately. Again, can't be killed by Vanishing Verse. It takes 5 whole mana for your opponent to kill it with a Meathook Massacre, so you're likely to get some value off of it in between you playing it and your opponent hitting the Meathook. So there's a lot of cool things about this card right now, actually. I like that it hits all non-land permanents, and we're in a format where a lot of different permanent types are seeing play. So it's uniquely good for that reason too. But it's also good because it lines up well against all these tokens decks people are playing, whether it's Selesnya tokens, Abzan tokens, or the more popular Orzhov and Esper variants of the deck. This only needs 1 counter on it to blow away all the tokens on the table, and that is really sweet. Another thing, too, about the Orzhov decks, the Esper decks, is they often play a ton of different permanent types. I've already kind of brought that up, but these decks will play like treasure tokens, they'll play Reckoner Bankbuster, they'll play Planeswalkers, they'll play the odd enchantment or two every now and again. So the ability to blow up a bunch of different permanent types on Sarulf is really relevant. I will say that Sarulf does have a huge target on its back, and people want to remove it as quickly as possible. But that is because it is a scary, scary card to play against. And I don't blame people for wanting to remove it very quickly. They want to remove it quickly because it is good against them. So try out the Wolf, and before you know it, you'll be loco for the Lobo. Anyway, that's all I've got for this one. Again, this could have been like a top 25. So let me know down there in the comment section like what you wanted to be on this list, because I'm pretty sure I will have thought of it, and maybe we can discuss it at length down there, because there's a lot. Like Ecological Appreciation was on here, and I crossed it out. So there's a lot of cards I think we should be looking at right now. Even if they're not necessarily good, I think we should still at least be trying them again, because Standard is incredibly open, and if we don't try these cards out, we'll never know. But again, that's all I got for this one. Just let me know on the sideboard how you felt about it and what your picks would be. Share the video around, like it if you got the time to hit the thumbs up button, and subscribe if you haven't done that yet for more content just like this, and some content that's also not like this, but just as good. You can also do any of this stuff. Watch me play some Magic on Twitch. Support me on Patreon because, I need money. Pays the rent. I need to pay my rent. Aside from that, you can also check me out on Twitter. I make takes. And sometimes I talk about when I'm going to upload videos or when I'm going to stream. So following me on Twitter is a good way to get information relevant to the channel if you care about that. But anyway, I'm done. So I guess I'm going to get out of here and edit this video. Love you guys, and I'll see you again very soon. I am Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.